The smell of antiseptic and stale coffee still clings to my memory from that day, a day that seared itself into my soul, leaving a scar that never truly healed. My name is Evelyn Reed, and for 16 years I carried the weight of abandonment like a lead cloak. Imagine being a child, barely 7 years old, standing alone in a sterile hospital hallway, while the two people who were supposed to protect you, love you unconditionally, simply walk away. They didn't even look back. Not a single glance over their shoulder. Just gone. Poof. Vanished from my life as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient afterthought, a discarded toy. What if I told you that the deepest wounds aren't always visible? What if the real monsters aren't hiding under your bed, but in the family photos you used to cherish? This isn't just a story about a little girl left behind. It's about a woman who spent a lifetime building a fortress around her heart, only for the very people who broke it to come crawling back. They came back, not out of remorse, not out of love, but because of something far more sinister, far more selfish. And when I say sinister, I mean a level of calculated greed that would make your stomach churn. Everyone thinks they know what true abandonment feels like, but until you've experienced that cold, hollow void, that profound sense of being utterly worthless, you can't truly comprehend it. For years, I believed I was the problem. I replayed every memory, every conversation, searching for the flaw in myself that made me so easily disposable. Was I too loud? Too quiet? Too much trouble? The questions gnawed at me, a relentless tormentor in the quiet hours of the night. Growing up, I watched other kids with their parents at school events, at birthday parties, at the mall, and a bitter envy coiled in my gut. My guardians, my Aunt Carol and Uncle David, were angels. Truly. But they weren't them. They weren't the ones who brought me into this world, then cruelly decided I wasn't worth keeping. I built a life for myself, brick by painstaking brick. I put myself through college, worked 2 jobs, and clawed my way into a respectable career. I learned to rely on no one, to trust only myself. My success wasn't just about financial security. It was a defiant middle finger to the past, a silent scream of, "I made it without you." And for a long time, that was enough. The resentment simmered beneath the surface, a constant low-burning fire, but it was manageable. I was in control, or so I thought. Then, the phone call came. A distant relative, someone I barely remembered, informing me of my great-aunt Eleanor's passing. Eleanor, an eccentric, reclusive woman I'd met maybe twice in my life, had left behind a surprisingly substantial estate. And here's where the story takes a sharp, chilling turn. Here's where the past, the very past I'd worked so hard to bury, decided to claw its way out of the grave. Because my parents, the people who had abandoned me without a second thought, suddenly reappeared. Not out of guilt, not out of a sudden surge of paternal or maternal instinct, but because they had discovered a clause in Aunt Eleanor's will that sent shockwaves through my carefully constructed world. They wanted what was mine. They wanted the inheritance, and they were willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to get it. The betrayal wasn't just a discovery. It was a brutal, visceral punch to the gut, a confirmation of every fear I'd ever harbored about their true nature. The resentment I had carried for years suddenly transformed into something far more potent, far more dangerous. It festered, grew, and mutated into an all-consuming obsession. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was furious, incandescent with a rage I hadn't known I possessed. They thought they could waltz back into my life, manipulate me, and steal what was rightfully mine. They thought they could abandon me, then profit from my family's legacy. They had another thing coming. This wasn't just about money. This was about justice. This was about every tear I'd ever shed, every lonely birthday, every unanswered question. This was about reclaiming my narrative, about showing them the consequences of their heartless choices. The moment of reckoning was approaching, a confrontation I had dreamed of, dreaded, and secretly yearned for my entire life, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they had done. I was going to make them feel every single ounce of pain they had inflicted upon a vulnerable child. What happened next, the intricate web of deceit, the shocking revelations, and the explosive showdown that followed, would change everything. Not just for me, but for them, forever. Are you ready to see how a broken child fought back and finally claimed her truth? My name is Alara Vance, and I remember the exact moment my world shattered. I was 6 years old, clutching a worn teddy bear, watching my parents, Sarah and Robert Vance, pack their sleek black sedan. The air was thick with unspoken goodbyes, a suffocating silence that pressed down on my small chest. They told me they were going on a long trip, a grand adventure, and that Aunt Carol would take care of me. Their smiles felt brittle, like thin ice over a churning river, and I instinctively knew something was terribly wrong. I stood on the porch of our modest suburban home in Willow Creek, California, a quiet town nestled in the foothills, and waved until their car disappeared down the oak-lined street. That was the last time I saw them for 16 years. Aunt Carol, bless her kind but weary soul, did her best. She was my mother's older sister, a woman who had always lived a simple life, working as a librarian. She wasn't prepared for a child, let alone one abandoned by her own flesh and blood. Our small house, always filled with the scent of old books and chamomile tea, suddenly echoed with my unanswered questions. Why did they leave? Were they coming back? Did they love me? Aunt Carol would hug me tight, her voice cracking as she promised they did, that sometimes grown-ups made mistakes they couldn't explain. But the sting of their absence, the raw wound of abandonment, festered within me, growing deeper with each passing year. My childhood wasn't a parade of misery, not entirely. Aunt Carol provided a stable, loving environment, but the shadow of my parents' desertion always loomed. Every birthday, every holiday, I'd scan the faces in a crowd, a flicker of hope igniting then dying, leaving behind the familiar ache. I watched other kids with their parents, their easy laughter, their shared moments, and a quiet resentment began to build inside me. It wasn't just sadness. It was a profound sense of injustice, a feeling that I had been robbed of something fundamental, something every child deserved. As I grew older, that resentment hardened into a resolve. I poured myself into my studies, not just for academic success, but as a form of armor, a way to prove my worth to myself, if not to the world. I excelled in school, earned a scholarship to UCLA, and pursued a degree in finance. I wanted to build a life so strong, so impenetrable, that no one could ever shatter it again. I learned to be self-reliant, to trust only myself, and to channel my pain into ambition. My goal wasn't just financial independence, it was an unyielding fortress against vulnerability. Life in Los Angeles was a whirlwind, a stark contrast to the sleepy streets of Willow Creek. I thrived in the competitive environment, pushing myself relentlessly. I graduated with honors, securing a coveted position at a prestigious investment firm downtown. I bought a small but stylish apartment in Santa Monica, overlooking the ocean. From the outside, my life looked like a triumph, a testament to overcoming adversity. But beneath the surface, the ghost of my past still haunted me. The question of why they left, of what kind of people could simply walk away from their child, gnawed at me. Then, the call came. It was Aunt Carol, her voice trembling. "Alara," she began. "It's about your Aunt Martha. She passed away." My great-aunt Martha, my grandmother's sister, had been a recluse, a wealthy eccentric who lived in a sprawling estate in Malibu, a place I'd only visited a handful of times as a very young child. She was a distant figure, but a part of my family nonetheless. Aunt Carol went on, her lawyers contacted me. "There's a will reading next week, and your parents are listed as beneficiaries." The words hit me like a physical blow. My parents, Sarah and Robert Vance, beneficiaries. After 16 years of silence, of absence, of pretending I didn't exist, they were suddenly resurfacing, drawn by the scent of money. The resentment I had carefully managed for so long erupted into a fiery rage. They abandoned me, left me to be raised by my aunt, and now they expected to waltz back into my life, into my family's life, to claim an inheritance? The sheer audacity, the unmitigated gall, was breathtaking. A cold, hard resolve settled over me. This wasn't just about money. It was about something far more profound. It was about justice, about confronting the people who had caused me so much pain. My Aunt Martha's inheritance, whatever it might be, was now a battleground. I wouldn't let them simply take what they felt entitled to, not after what they did. This wasn't just a will reading, it was an opportunity, a chance to finally face them, to demand answers, and to make them understand the depth of the wound they had inflicted. The thought of seeing their faces again, after all these years, filled me with a potent mix of dread and fierce determination. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this confrontation would be anything but civil. The quiet girl who once watched her parents drive away was gone. In her place stood Alara Vance, a woman fueled by a burning desire for reckoning. The years after their departure blurred into a mosaic of quiet resilience and simmering anger. Aunt Carol, my steadfast guardian, did her best to fill the void, but some absences are too profound to ever truly be filled. I learned to cook, to clean, to manage a budget, skills born not of childhood curiosity but of necessity. While other kids were navigating school dances and first crushes, I was navigating a different kind of reality, one where every choice felt weighted with the ghost of my parents' abandonment. The quiet resentment that had begun to brew in my childhood solidified into something harder, something sharper, an unyielding conviction that I deserved answers, and perhaps more. My adolescence was marked by a relentless pursuit of independence. I worked odd jobs after school, saving every dollar, driven by an instinct to never again be dependent on anyone. I excelled in academics, not out of passion, but because it felt like the most tangible path to a future where I controlled my own destiny. College was a blur of textbooks and late-night shifts, a constant grind fueled by a desire to prove myself, not to my absent parents, but to the strong, self-sufficient woman I was determined to become. Aunt Carol, ever supportive, watched with a mixture of pride and concern, understanding the deep-seated motivations that propelled me forward. She knew the pain that still lingered, a constant thrum beneath the surface of my determined exterior. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, an innocuous cream-colored envelope among the usual bills, addressed to Alara Vance. My hands trembled as I opened it, a strange premonition gripping me. It was from a law firm, a prestigious one based in New York City, and the contents sent a shockwave through my carefully constructed world. My great-aunt Beatrice, a distant relative I barely remembered, had passed away. And, to my utter astonishment, she had left me everything. Her estate was vast, encompassing properties, investments, and a substantial sum of money. The letter explicitly stated that her will had been updated just months before her death, specifically naming me as the sole heir. No mention of my parents, Sarah and Robert Vance. No mention of anyone else, just me. The news felt surreal, a bizarre twist of fate that was almost too incredible to believe. Aunt Carol cried tears of joy and relief, seeing it as a divine intervention, a chance for me to finally have the life I deserved. But for me, it was more than just a stroke of luck, it was a catalyst. It was the moment the simmering resentment transformed into a burning purpose. The sheer scale of the inheritance, the sudden shift in my financial reality, was overwhelming. I was no longer just the abandoned child, I was a woman of means, a woman with power, and with that power came a clarity I hadn't possessed before. My great-aunt Beatrice had always been a bit of an enigma, a formidable woman who had lived life on her own terms. I vaguely remembered a single visit when I was very young, a grand house filled with antiques and the scent of lavender. She had been kind, if a little formidable, her eyes sharp and knowing. Now, looking back, I wondered if she had seen something in me, something that resonated with her own independent spirit. Her will felt like a posthumous embrace, a silent affirmation that I was seen, I was valued, even when my own parents had chosen to disappear. The legal process was daunting, a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, and estate planners. I learned about trusts, portfolios, and assets I never knew existed. Each document I signed, each decision I made, further solidified the reality of my new circumstances. My life, once defined by absence and struggle, was now defined by an unexpected abundance. But this newfound wealth wasn't just about comfort, it was about leverage. It was about evening the playing field. I started to dig, quietly at first, then with increasing intensity. My great-aunt Beatrice's will had a clause, a small but significant detail that hinted at her intentions. It stipulated that if any attempt was made to contest the will by individuals not named as beneficiaries, they would be immediately disinherited from any other potential claims. It was a clear warning, a protective measure, and it fueled my suspicion that Beatrice knew something, that she understood the nature of my parents' abandonment. The lawyers, initially intrigued by my questions, soon became wary. They saw a young woman grappling with a sudden fortune. But I saw myself as an investigator, piecing together a puzzle that had haunted me for years. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Frank Miller, a gruff but astute man who specialized in tracing missing persons. I gave him the only leads I had, Sarah and Robert Vance, my parents, last seen 16 years ago, driving a black sedan. I didn't tell him about the inheritance initially. I wanted him to find them because they were my parents, not because I was suddenly rich. But the truth, as it often does, had a way of revealing itself. Frank's initial reports were frustratingly vague. He found no official records of their continued existence, no obvious paper trail. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they hadn't simply disappeared. They had chosen to disappear. And now, armed with resources and a burning desire for answers, I was going to make them reappear. The quiet girl who had waved goodbye on that oak-lined street was gone. In her place stood Alara Vance, a woman with a plan, a woman ready to confront the ghosts of her past, and a woman who now possessed the means to ensure that reckoning would be absolute. The inheritance from Aunt Carol had transformed everything. It wasn't just money. It was leverage, a weapon forged from years of quiet sacrifice and unacknowledged love. The sum was substantial, enough to hire the best, to open doors that had remained firmly shut to a librarian's niece. My first step was assembling a team, not of lawyers to fight a legal battle, but of investigators who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. I needed answers, not just about their whereabouts, but about why they left. What grand adventure was so important it eclipsed their own child? The resentment I had carried for so long was now sharpened into a laser focus. My obsession took root, twisting around every waking thought. I spent countless hours poring over the reports my investigators delivered. They unearthed fragments of a life I never knew, a life my parents had carefully constructed after disappearing. There were shell corporations, offshore accounts, and a dizzying trail of aliases. It painted a picture of calculated evasion, not a spontaneous escape. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision, this was premeditated abandonment. The betrayal felt fresh, a searing wound reopening with each new revelation. They hadn't just left me, they had erased me from their lives, as if I were a mistake to be forgotten. One evening, a thick dossier arrived, much heavier than the others. Inside, meticulously documented, was their current address, a sprawling estate in a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona. Not some exotic far-flung adventure, but a life of opulent comfort. Paid for with what, I wondered. The photos showed them tanned and smiling, hosting lavish garden parties, their faces etched with a contentment I had never witnessed in our humble home. My mother, Sarah, looked younger, her eyes sparkling with an artificial joy. My father, Robert, had a confident swagger, a man who believed he had escaped all consequences. The sight of them, living so carelessly while I navigated a childhood shadowed by their absence, ignited a firestorm within me. This wasn't just about finding them anymore, it was about confronting the lie, about forcing them to look at the wreckage they had left behind. I booked a flight to Arizona, my heart a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. The moment I stepped off the plane, the dry desert air felt like a challenge, a stark contrast to the familiar dampness of Willow Creek. I rented a car, a nondescript sedan, and drove toward Scottsdale, the address etched into my memory. My plan was simple: observe, gather more intel, and then, when the moment was right, strike. I wasn't going to burst in unannounced. I was going to orchestrate a reunion they would never forget. The gated community was a fortress of wealth, manicured lawns stretching as far as the eye could see. I parked a few blocks away, my gaze fixed on their house, a modern architectural marvel with floor-to-ceiling windows. I watched them through binoculars, observing their routines, their interactions. They seemed to live a life of carefree luxury, oblivious to the existence of the daughter they had discarded. The bitterness festered, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. How could they? How could any parent simply vanish and then build such a life without a single backward glance? One afternoon, I saw my mother, Sarah, laughing with a group of women by their poolside. She was wearing an expensive sundress, a diamond glinting on her finger. Her laughter, once a distant memory, now grated on my ears. It was a sound devoid of the warmth I had longed for as a child. Later, my father, Robert, drove off in a sleek sports car, presumably to a golf course. They were living the American dream, a dream I had been excluded from. This wasn't just about money, it was about the fundamental injustice of it all. They had chosen this life, and in doing so, they had chosen to abandon me. The confrontation wouldn't be a quiet conversation, it would be an earthquake. I knew I couldn't just walk up to their door and demand answers. They would deny everything, invent excuses, or worse, simply dismiss me. I needed to hit them where it hurt, to disrupt their perfectly constructed world in a way they couldn't ignore. The inheritance from Aunt Carol wasn't just for finding them, it was for dismantling their facade, for exposing the truth they had so desperately tried to bury. The quiet girl who had waved goodbye on that oak-lined street was indeed gone. In her place stood Alara Vance, a woman with a plan, a woman ready to confront the ghosts of her past, and a woman who now possessed the means to ensure that reckoning would be absolute. The next step was to make sure they couldn't run again. My research, fueled by an almost manic determination, led me down rabbit holes of financial records, public registries, and even obscure social media trails. I discovered they had been living under assumed names in a small gated community in Arizona, not exactly hiding, but certainly not advertising their presence. They had reinvented themselves, again, as successful real estate developers, a cruel twist of irony given their past. The facade was meticulously crafted, a testament to their skill in deception, but beneath it, I could see the cracks. The information I gathered painted a picture of a life built on sand, a constant struggle to maintain appearances, always one step ahead of the consequences of their actions. This wasn't the glamorous adventure they had promised me. It was a desperate, exhausting existence. A strange sense of satisfaction settled over me, not because I wished them ill, but because it confirmed what I had always suspected. They were not living a life of bliss, free from the repercussions of their choices. Their supposed freedom was a gilded cage of their own making. My focus shifted from discovery to strategy. I needed to corner them, to force a confrontation they couldn't escape. The inheritance, Aunt Carol's legacy, was my leverage. It was the bait, the irresistible lure that would draw them out of their self-imposed exile. I knew their greed, their insatiable desire for wealth, would override any instinct for self-preservation. They would come for it, I was certain. I began to orchestrate the revelation of the inheritance, carefully leaking information through channels I knew they would eventually discover. It wasn't about a direct accusation, It was about planting the seed, letting their own avarice do the work. I watched, metaphorically speaking, as the news spread, a ripple in the calm waters of their carefully constructed lives. The waiting was excruciating, a slow burn of anticipation that gnawed at my nerves, yet I savored every moment. Each passing day brought me closer to the reckoning. Then came the phone call. It was a lawyer, a sharp, precise voice, informing me that Sarah and Robert Vance had been in contact, inquiring about the will of Carol Vance. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The trap was set, and they were walking right into it. The lawyer, unaware of the intricate web I had woven, spoke of their concern for their long-lost sister's affairs, their surprise at the news. I almost laughed. Their concern was as transparent as their lies. I played along, feigning a polite, slightly bewildered tone, agreeing to a meeting to discuss the details. The lawyer suggested their office in downtown Los Angeles, a neutral territory. I countered, insisting on a more public, less intimidating venue. I chose a high-end restaurant, a place where their usual tactics of intimidation and manipulation would be less effective, a place where witnesses would be plentiful, even if they were oblivious to the drama unfolding before them. I wanted them to feel exposed, vulnerable, stripped of their usual control. The day of the meeting arrived, cloaked in a nervous energy that vibrated through me. I dressed meticulously, choosing an outfit that exuded quiet confidence, a stark contrast to the small, abandoned girl they remembered. I arrived early, securing a table by the window, observing the street below, my mind a whirlwind of memories and predictions. I imagined their expressions, the shock, the feigned remorse, the underlying greed. I rehearsed my responses, my voice, my demeanor, determined not to crack, not to show a single flicker of the vulnerability they had exploited so long ago. As I waited, I remembered Aunt Carol, her gentle spirit, her unwavering love. This wasn't just for me, it was for her too. It was for every quiet kindness she had shown, every tear she had wiped away, every sacrifice she had made. Her inheritance, meant to provide comfort in her later years, was now a tool for justice, a weapon in the hands of the child she had so selflessly raised. The irony was not lost on me. Then I saw them. They walked into the restaurant, their heads held high, an air of practiced sophistication clinging to them like expensive cologne. My mother, Sarah, still beautiful, though lines of stress etched themselves around her eyes. My father, Robert, his once boyish charm now replaced by a hardened, calculating gaze. They scanned the room, their eyes gliding over me without recognition, a testament to how completely I had been erased from their lives. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach, not of fear, but of righteous indignation. They had no idea who I was, or what was about to unfold. The game was about to begin. The auctioneer's voice boomed, a rhythmic chant filling the grand hall, but my focus remained locked on them. Sarah and Robert, my parents, were oblivious, their faces a mask of avarice as they bid on a sapphire necklace, a piece I knew Aunt Carol had cherished. A small, cruel smile touched my lips. They were so close to the trap, so utterly consumed by the lure of wealth, they couldn't see the jaws closing around them. I watched as Robert's hand shot up again, a desperate bid, then Sarah's, her eyes glittering with a hunger I recognized from my own early years, a hunger for what they believed was rightfully theirs. Then came the moment. The auctioneer cleared his throat, a dramatic pause, and announced the next item, Lot 347, the Vance family homestead, located in Willow Creek, California. A hush fell over the room. My parents' heads snapped up, their expressions shifting from greedy anticipation to bewildered shock. They exchanged a frantic glance, a silent communication of disbelief. This was it. This was the precise instant I had been meticulously planning for, the culmination of 16 years of simmering resentment and calculated revenge. I raised my hand, a confident, almost casual gesture. The auctioneer acknowledged me, his gaze lingering for a moment. Sarah's eyes, wide with confusion, finally found mine across the crowded room. Recognition dawned, slow and agonizing, twisting her features into a grotesque tableau of horror. Robert, seeing her reaction, followed her line of sight. His jaw dropped, the color draining from his face as he stared at me. His abandoned daughter, now a formidable woman. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of years of neglect. $1 million, I stated, my voice clear and unwavering, cutting through the stunned silence. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. My parents recoiled as if struck. They knew the house, our old home, was worth a fraction of that. This wasn't about the property's value. It was about a statement, a public declaration of my existence and my power. Robert stammered. Alara, what are you doing? His voice was a pathetic whisper, devoid of its former arrogance. I met his gaze, a cold fire in my eyes. I'm buying back what was stolen from me, I replied, my words carrying across the hushed room, each syllable a hammer blow against their carefully constructed facade. And I'm making sure you never set foot on that property again. The betrayal, the raw wound of abandonment, fueled every word. Aunt Carol's quiet suffering, my lonely birthdays, the gnawing emptiness, it all coalesced into this single potent moment. Sarah, ever the manipulator, recovered slightly. Darling, what is this all about? We can talk about this. We're your parents. Her voice, though strained, held a false sweetness that made my stomach churn. She tried to approach me, a desperate plea in her eyes, but I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. The sheer audacity, the gall, of her calling me darling after all these years was almost laughable. You lost the right to call yourselves my parents the day you drove away and left a 6-year-old child behind, I countered, my voice rising, imbued with all the hurt and anger I had suppressed for so long. You traded a daughter for a grand adventure. Now you'll watch as I reclaim every last piece of what you discarded. The crowd murmured, their eyes darting between us, sensing the deep-seated drama unfolding before them. This was no ordinary auction, it was a public reckoning. Robert, his face a mask of desperation, finally found his voice. But the inheritance, Alara. Your Aunt Carol's will. It clearly states the house was to be sold, and the proceeds divided equally amongst all beneficiaries. You can't just buy it out from under us. His words were laced with panic, the reality of their impending financial loss hitting him hard. He was still clinging to the illusion of his entitlement. Ah, yes, Aunt Carol's will, I said, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my face. You see, there's a small detail you might have overlooked. A codicil added just before she passed. A very specific clause that grants the primary beneficiary, that would be me, the first right of refusal on all properties. And it also stipulates that any beneficiary who has demonstrably abandoned a dependent minor for a period exceeding 10 years forfeits all claims to any real estate assets. Their faces crumpled. It was a legal loophole, a carefully crafted clause Aunt Carol had put in place, knowing their true nature. She had seen through them, just as I had. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by my parents' ragged breathing. They were trapped, their avarice leading them directly into the snare. The justice I had yearned for, the sweet taste of retribution, was finally within my grasp. They had spent years chasing phantom riches, only to lose everything they thought they deserved. This wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about finally closing the chapter on their abandonment, and writing my own ending. The day of the hearing arrived, a crisp autumn morning that felt strangely out of sync with the storm raging inside me. I walked into the courtroom, the sterile air chilling me to the bone, but my resolve burned hotter than ever. Sarah and Robert sat at their table, looking pale and drawn, their usual veneer of superiority crumbling under the harsh fluorescent lights. Their lawyers buzzed around them, whispering frantically, but their efforts were futile. The evidence I had painstakingly gathered, the undeniable proof of their calculated abandonment and subsequent grasping for wealth, was irrefutable. When it was my turn to speak, I stood tall, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I recounted the story of that day 16 years ago. The brittle smiles, the hollow promises, the profound emptiness they left behind. I spoke of Aunt Carol, her unwavering love, her sacrifices, and the quiet dignity with which she raised me. I laid bare the emotional scars, the constant ache of not being enough, of being discarded. My words weren't just accusations, they were a testament to the life they had stolen and the strength I had found in their absence. I saw Sarah flinch, a flicker of something that might have been shame in her eyes, but Robert remained stoic, his face a mask of practiced indifference. It was a familiar look, one I had seen countless times in my childhood when he wanted to dismiss my feelings. The judge listened intently, his gaze moving between us. He had heard all the legal arguments, seen all the documents. Now he was witnessing the human cost of their actions. The lawyers made their final pleas, painting my parents as victims of circumstance, misguided but ultimately loving. It was a pathetic attempt, a desperate flailing against the tide of truth. Then, the judge delivered his verdict. He cited the clear pattern of abandonment, the lack of contact, and the sudden reappearance only after the inheritance became public. He declared their claim to Aunt Carol's house null and void, citing my long-term care and emotional damages. The house, he decreed, was unequivocally mine. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't just about the property, it was about validation. It was about hearing an official, unbiased voice acknowledge the injustice I had suffered. Sarah gasped, a small, choked sound, and Robert finally lost his composure, his jaw dropping in disbelief. They had truly believed they could waltz back into my life, take what they wanted, and leave again. The look on their faces was priceless, a mixture of shock, anger, and utter defeat. It was the moment I had yearned for, the sweet, undeniable taste of justice. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The air outside seemed fresher, the sun brighter. My parents stormed past me, not even sparing a glance, their faces contorted with fury. Their silent rage was a symphony to my ears. They had lost everything they had schemed for, and in doing so, had finally revealed their true selves to the world, and more importantly, to me. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation I had once envisioned, no shouting matches or tearful apologies. It was far more satisfying, a quiet, undeniable victory achieved through truth and resilience. I returned to Aunt Carol's house, my home, with a new sense of ownership, not just of the property, but of my own story. The old house, filled with memories of Aunt Carol's gentle presence, now felt truly mine, a sanctuary I had fought for and won. I walked through the familiar rooms, touching the worn furniture, feeling the echoes of her love. It wasn't a triumphant, vengeful celebration. It was a profound sense of peace. The resentment that had simmered for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet strength. The house became a canvas for my future. I decided to keep it, to honor Aunt Carol's legacy, and to build a life within its walls that was filled with genuine love and connection, something my biological parents had never understood. I started a small online business, using my skills to create a life of independence. I cultivated friendships, real relationships built on trust, not expectation. The constant need for their approval, the lingering hope for their return, finally vanished. I realized I didn't need them to complete me. I was whole on my own, a testament to Aunt Carol's unwavering love and my own resilience. Sometimes I still think about Sarah and Robert. I hear whispers through the grapevine. Their lavish lifestyle had crumbled, their investments had failed, and they were facing financial ruin. They had chased a phantom of wealth, sacrificing everything, including their own child, only to end up with nothing. There was no joy in their misfortune, no lingering desire for further retribution. Just a quiet understanding that their choices had led them to this path, a path I had consciously chosen to diverge from. My ending wasn't about their suffering, it was about my healing. The house, once a symbol of my abandonment, transformed into a symbol of my rebirth. It was a place where I could finally close the chapter on their betrayal, not with bitterness but with a profound sense of self-worth. My narrative was no longer defined by their absence, but by my presence, my strength, and the love I had found in unexpected places. I had written my own ending, a story of resilience, not revenge, and in doing so I finally found true freedom. The air in that courtroom was thick with unspoken accusations, each gaze a judgment. My parents, now stripped of their carefully constructed facade, sat across from me, their faces etched with a desperate blend of fear and resentment. The inheritance, once a symbol of their greed, now hung over them like a guillotine. The trial itself was a blur of legal jargon and emotional testimony. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Evelyn, meticulously laid out their history of abandonment, the forged documents, and the elaborate scheme to seize Aunt Carol's fortune. She presented the evidence with a calm, unwavering conviction that sliced through their flimsy defenses. My parents, on the other hand, fumbled through their testimonies, their lies unraveling with each nervous glance and contradictory statement. They tried to paint themselves as victims, as loving parents who had simply made a few mistakes, but the weight of their actions was too heavy to deny. Then came my turn. Walking to the stand, I felt a strange mix of nerves and an almost unsettling calm. For so long, I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, imagining every word, every accusation. But standing there, looking at the people who had given me life and then discarded it, a different emotion surfaced. It wasn't the fiery rage I expected, but a profound sadness, a sense of loss for what could have been. I spoke not with anger, but with a quiet dignity, recounting the lonely years, the constant struggle, and the aching void they had left behind. I detailed how Aunt Carol had stepped in, a true guardian angel, providing not just shelter, but love, stability, and a belief in my worth that they had never offered. I told the court about her final wishes, her explicit desire for me to inherit everything, a testament to her unwavering faith in me. The jury returned their verdict swiftly, guilty on all counts of fraud and attempted theft. The judge's voice, clear and unyielding, handed down the sentences. My mother received 5 years, my father 7. The courtroom erupted in a murmur of whispers and gasps. As the bailiffs led them away, their eyes met mine. There was no apology, no remorse, just a flicker of raw, unadulterated hatred. It was a stark reminder that some wounds run too deep for healing, some hearts too hardened for change. In the aftermath, the media frenzy was intense. My story became a headline, a cautionary tale of family betrayal and the enduring power of love found in unexpected places. While the spotlight was uncomfortable, it also brought a strange sense of validation. The world saw their cruelty, and it saw my resilience. With the legal battles behind me, a new chapter began. The inheritance, once a source of bitter conflict, became a tool for positive change. I established a foundation in Aunt Carol's name, dedicated to supporting young adults who had been abandoned or neglected, providing them with the resources and mentorship I had so desperately needed. It was my way of honoring her legacy, of turning a painful past into a hopeful future. One quiet afternoon, months later, I visited Aunt Carol's grave. The sun was warm, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the trees. I placed a bouquet of her favorite wildflowers on her headstone. "We did it, Aunt Carol," I whispered, a tear tracing a path down my cheek. "We got justice." The victory felt bittersweet, a blend of triumph and lingering sorrow. I had won the battle, but the scars of abandonment would always remain. Yet, looking out at the peaceful landscape, a sense of profound peace settled over me. I wasn't just Aunt Carol's heir, I was her legacy. I was no longer defined by my parents' abandonment, but by the love and strength I had found in myself, and in the memory of a woman who had shown me what family truly meant. The past was a part of me, but it no longer held me captive. My future, finally was my own.